Hello, everyone, and welcome to our K-1 and Pass-Through Entity Series. I'm Dave Stauffacher, the Senior Credit Trainer with Lenders Online Training, where we help lending and credit professionals say yes to good loans and maybe no to some that aren't quite so good. Joining me today is Linda Keith, our company's founder and our Chief Credit Training Officer. Hi, Linda. Welcome today.
Hello, David. Thank you for having me.
Another question came in from our viewers. I want to share it with you. This has to do with our K-1 Pass-Through series, and I think it's perfect for me. Should I use the latest K-1 if it appears to be recurring, or should I average those? I'm kind of one of those that likes to average, but is that the right way to do it, Linda?
Well, this question of do I use the most recent information versus averages actually applies to income on any tax return. So we will focus on pass-throughs. The other thing is, I just looked at this question again. It says, should I use the latest K-1 if it appears to be recurring, or should I average the past three K-1s? What is it about it that makes it appear to be recurring if it's not the average? Interesting question. So maybe you know something about that borrower that tells you that the most recent year is the recurring one. I'm not sure, but let's look at a couple things that I look at to help me decide. First of all, averaging 3 years is kind of the standard way to decide these, but your point is right. Sometimes the average of the 3 years is not reflective of what we really actually think is going to recur. So another piece to this might be to understand the underlying business better. If that 3-year average doesn't line up with the most recent year, why is a good question. It could be that this business is reacting to tariffs and supply chain and weather issues, labor challenges. It could be the company is in expansion or getting ready to expand. It could be they are actually retracting. It could be they had some major non-recurring expense that the way the owner kind of covered that blip in their liquidity was simply to not take as much home. Or it could be that a windfall, they finally got a lawsuit settlement or something, and the owner took advantage of that blip in positive cash flow to take more home. Now, you will have a much better sense of this if you are actually lending to the entity rather than only to the individual, because the individual, unless you have a long history with that borrower or you do both for that borrower, you do individual lending, but also business, you are not going to have as much of a knowledge to go to start with about this business and what might be going on. Now, you might say, yeah, I don't know about this business, but they are a restaurant. I know something about restaurants, right? Be really careful. That's a confirmation bias issue. Be really careful that you don't apply to the specific borrower what you think you know about the whole class that they are in. It can give you the starting point for the conversation. I know some other restaurants are struggling with whatever. How is that going for you? But we want to be cautious that we don't apply to a borrower some rule or guideline that is everybody in that particular class. So let's see. That was how do you decide? That's at least part of how I would decide. What else would help us answer this question, David?
Linda, you brought up the fact of whether you're an existing client with you. Oftentimes, I think I've done some valuations for businesses, and I like to use 5 years. That's always been my focal point because it kind of smooths out the ebbs and flows. And I often try to prorate a little skewed towards the most recent numbers, the last 1, 2, or 3 years, to kind of get me comfortable where it may happen in the next 12, 24 months as forward. What I want to make sure is whatever period, whether it's 3 years, whether it's 4 years, is there an anomaly in there? Is there something there that just stands out? One thing that really brings closer to attention is during COVID. When I do valuations or when I've looked at returns, COVID during that period, 2020, was ugly for some businesses. So at times, many of us looked at that and says that truly is an anomaly for most businesses because we knew that happened. So we may not put a lot of emphasis on that. We may do it later for 21, 22, et cetera. So is it an anomaly? Is it something that is so unusual that it wasn't like year 1, year 3? Can I live with that and be able to maybe take an average of that? The other thing, as I mentioned before, is understanding the business. I think you made it well known that truly understanding what is going on to the business. You mentioned a little bit about restaurants as far as understanding the industry. We may understand the industry from a lending perspective as to what may have impacted those businesses. Not every business would be maybe impacted. We have to be a little bit cautious, but it's great to have in our mindset to say what happened during that time. For example, what we're experiencing right now, tariffs, happens a lot of businesses, different industries. So when you start to get into what may have happened during those numbers, the pandemic, I've even had some where there was an unfortunate family situation where one of the partners actually had passed. We had to deal with that. So that changed the dynamics of the whole culture of the company during that period. So once you understand a little bit more about the company, you can then step back and say, okay, how do I want to evaluate the cash flow from those year one, year two, year threes, and what truly is recurring? We as lenders, we're really focused on recurring cash flow. What we're looking at is to pay our debt next year, the year after. Although historical is important, that's what happened. We're going to document that. That's what happened. But what does it look like in recurring? And do we have the confidence in those numbers or in the operations of the business that they have the cash flows available to be able to pay our debt going forward? Linda, did I mention anything else? Do I need anything?
I like the idea of focusing on recurring cash flow, especially projected recurring. It's a little nuanced, right? But it's like, yes, I can see what's recurring based on what I just saw for 3 years. But then I had this conversation and I realized that, oh, wait a minute, there's something else that is changing. One of the things that you can consider if you are having a K-1 that's wobbling, right? So you're considering not averaging all three, maybe average 2 or go with the most recent for some reason that you've had that conversation with the borrower, you understand why it happened. You've had that conversation possibly with your manager, your mentor lender saying, this is what I understand. Can we do something here? There's always the possibility of shoring up your risk mitigation. So if you have a range of acceptable debt coverage ratio and somebody's got a K-1 that's doing this, then maybe you want to be at the higher end of your either debt to income or debt coverage ratio, or maybe the collateral or the liquidity requirements. I know that you have to treat all your borrowers the same, right? So we do have to be careful that we're not discriminating against one by giving them a better deal than somebody else. But when it is based on differences in risk, then I think that's where it can work. The documentation becomes very important. Let me add a little bit to this, and that is that if you don't make good notes when you're making these decisions about why you thought this, the conversation with your borrower and so forth, a couple of years later, when we finally come through whatever the problem was, and things maybe turned out the way you thought or did not, the problem is that you as the lender 2 years from now, or the regulator, or the senior credit people get to looking at that and they start thinking, why the heck did David do that? What were we thinking? And maybe the decision we made at the time was a good decision. We talked it out. We got additional information. And then it didn't work out the way we hoped, but it was a good guess at the time. If you didn't document it well, then people later, you included, are not going to know why the heck did we do that. Regulators during several of these recessions that are somewhat recent, and of course I've been through 5 by now, so I get them all mixed up, right? But regulators during the Great Recession and again during the pandemic said things like, we will not criticize you. The whole PPP loans, we won't criticize you if based on the best information, you make you change the structure of a loan or you do something to support your borrowers. We won't do that. And yet they weren't going to come in and see what you did until 2 or 3 years later. How will they know that what you did was a reasonable thing based on their guidance that reasonable would work? They won't. So we hit on this all the time in the training that we do in Lenders Online Training, both How do you ask a question? How do you document it? What do you write down so that later you and anybody else that needs to know knows what you were thinking? All right, so that's the K-1. Do we use an average 3 years or do we use the latest? The answer probably is A, it depends. B, check your guidelines, but also there's variations on that. We're just trying to get the best estimate possible of recurring cash flow available to pay debt. And if it's a business deal, pay the owners. That's it, David. I think we did it once again.
Yes, we did it in time. Nice one.
We are looking forward to that next question coming in at experts@lendersonlinetraining.com. We answer the questions. They don't have to be on K-1s and pass-throughs, even though this series is on that. They can be on tax returns or financial statements. Focused in our area, we do focus on small to mid-sized businesses, so we don't answer a whole lot of questions about CPA audited, complicated tax returns. But if it's to small or mid-sized business, if it is to farming operations, if it is to complex individual borrowers like owners or high net worth, high income individuals, that's kind of our bread and butter. Happy to answer the questions. It does inform our blog post, Ask the Experts. It also does inform our live streams. By the way, Ask the Experts, you can sign up. lendersonlinetraining.com/ask the experts. And that is how you get on the list to get the actual answers from actual questions from actual lenders and credit analysts that relate to tax return analysis and financial statement analysis. It comes out weekly. Subject line always tells you what the question is. You can delete it, you can read it, you can pass it on to your team. We at Lenders Online Training believe in doing the foundational training for you, but then providing you and all of our students who have gone back out into the world that drip method of learning where you continue to add to your understanding so that you can make good loan decisions as quickly as possible with a lot of confidence and enhance your career, your bank, and your borrowers. It's kind of the trifecta, isn't it, David?
Yes. We're here to help you with conversations. That's what we love to do.
Absolutely. That would be, there's 6 C's of credit, but conversations, we're going to make it 7.
We're going to make it 7.
We're going to make it 7. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Bye, everybody.